From the moment Christopher Columbus arrived in America, the Native Americans were treated as foreigners, and the white people were treated as those who had been here for hundreds of years. The Native Americans once dominated the Great Plains, living the way that they believed in. However, the white man took away the ability for Native Americans to practice their values, one tribe at a time. The Native Americans knew that they were being treated unfair, and they made a decision to come together as one. These individuals came together to fight for their rights, their land, and their equality as a community. The Native Americans bonded together in the late 1960s to regain what they believed in was rightfully theirs, as stated in the U.S. History Encyclopedia. The Native American Indian Movement, the Native Americans were aware of the injustices served to them, and they made the decision that they deserved what they desired. The Native Americans worked extremely hard to build an organization from the bottom to now becoming a powerful force that the government listens and tries to work with. The American Indian Movement went to work immediately after its creation and has been involved in many movements to seek equality. The American Indian Movement has been a long and difficult movement for these Native American people. And after researching and studying this American Indian Movement, it is clear to all of us that this movement is only somewhat successful.
What provoked the assembly? Historically, the relationship between the U.S. government and Native Americans has been rocky. Up until 1935, American Indian people could be fined and sent to prison for practicing their traditional religious beliefs. There's a long-standing history of the government taking away Native American land, and Native Americans have consistently been left out of many important government programs. According to Joan Nagel, a professor at Kansas University and a Native American, the American Indian Movement finally called attention to the huge issues surrounding the relationship between the government and the Native American people. She said, "I'd never heard anyone actually tell the world that we needed somebody to pay attention to our treaty rights, that our people had given up an entire continent and many lives in return for basic services like healthcare and education. But nobody was honoring these agreements. For the first time, people were saying things I felt but hadn't known how to articulate. It was very liberating." The American Indian Movement was to fight police brutality. According to Virgil Killstraight, a Oglala Lakota Nation tribe member, AIM was born out of the dark violence of police brutality and voiceless despair of Indian people in the courts of Minneapolis, Minnesota. AIM was born because a few knew that it was enough to endure for themselves and all others like them who were trying to gain their rights. The American Indian Movement, in essence, is to bring awareness to all the iniquities that the common American Indian faces. The realities of being a Native American in the United States are harsh. Government has continually taken away their culture by pushing for assimilation. During the 1950s and 1960s, President Eisenhower was pushing for the urbanization of Native Americans, which did nothing but anger Indians. Part of Eisenhower's plan included relocation of thousands of Native Americans to urban areas in order to encourage assimilation and economic self-sufficiency. Such policies catalyzed Native American activism in the late 1950s and early 1960s as members of various tribes met to discuss their grievances. By pushing for assimilation, President Eisenhower was destroying Native American culture and independence. Thus, the American Indian Movement was formed in order to help preserve their culture. According to Laura Woodstock, a writer for the American Indian Movement, government policies need to be changed. She said, "The movement was founded to turn the attention of Indian people toward a renewal of spirituality, which would impart the strength of resolve needed to reverse the ruinous policies of the United States, Canada, and other colonialist governments of Central and South America. At the heart of AIM is deep spirituality and a belief in the connectedness of all Indian people." The three main people who led the movement in its early years were Clyde Bellecourt, Dennis Banks, and George Mitchell.
The major events of the American Indian Movement. The Native American movement had multiple organized protests, most notably in the time span of the late 1960s to the early 70s. The Native Americans' goals for these protests generally encompassed land retrieval and compensation for reconstruction from the federal government. In 1972, the American Indian Movement organized a march on Washington, D.C., known as the Trail of Broken Treaties. The organization produced a list of 20 demands for the U.S. government, including full political sovereignty for Indian nations, an evaluation of all treaties past and present, and $15 billion in aid to develop reservations. The estimated 800 marchers who forcibly occupied the offices of the Bureau of Indian Affairs for 6 days caused more than $2 million in damages. A protest more focused on land taken from Native Americans by the federal government was when the group of Indians of all tribes, the IAT, occupied Alcatraz for 19 months, from November 20th, 1969 to June 11th, 1971, and was forcibly ended by the U.S. government. According to the IAT, the Treaty of Fort Laramie of 1868 between the U.S. and the Sioux should have been returned or retired, abandoned, or out-of-use federal land to the native people from whom it was acquired. Since Alcatraz Penitentiary had been closed on March 21, 1963, and the island had been declared surplus federal property in 1964, a number of activists felt that the island qualified for reclamation. The determined activists stayed occupying Alcatraz for 19 months before forcibly removed by the U.S. government.
Goals and pursuance of goals. The goals of the American Indian Movement were clearly established in the 20-point position paper. This Trail of Broken Treaties paper was published in 1972 and documents the main goals of the movement. Overall, the main goals were a better life, such as housing, employment, and education, and to attain a higher level of respect for Native Americans' right and sovereignty. These were and still are the defining goals of the American Indian Movement. The movement pursued these goals through many different methods, but generally speaking, the group was known for its confrontational and aggressive tactics. Joan Nagel, professor at University of Kansas, describes the different methods. AIM blended civil rights and anti-war protest strategies, such as marches, demonstrations, occupations, and sit-ins, with Indian symbolic targets and repertories of resistance, such as the capture of the Mayflower II on Thanksgiving in 1970, a brief occupation of Mount Rushmore in 1971, the longest walk from San Francisco to Washington, D.C. in 1978, and the encampment of Camp Yellow Thunder in South Dakota's Black Hills in the 1980s. The creative and powerful nature of these protests are one of the most striking characteristics of this movement. This is the first time in history that Native Americans take an aggressive Malcolm X-style approach to securing their rights. Their marches are among some of the movement's major events, and they brought about the most change.
The Native American land situation. The control of land has been problematic for Native Americans for hundreds of years. The expansion of white settlers into the western land of America forced many Native American tribes to relocate into smaller chunks of land that is out of the way from normal civilization. That was not perfectly fit for the tribe. This was an opportunity for land-hungry white Americans to acquire Indian land, a process accelerated by the 1903 Supreme Court decision in Lone Wolf v. Hickok that Congress could dispose of Indian land without gaining the consent from the Indians involved. Not surprisingly, the amount of Indian land shrank from 154 million acres in 1887 to a mere 48 million and a half a century later. This was said by Boxer. More recently, many tribes have tried to get their land taken by the federal government. As stated it best, since the Nagasek tribe was federally recognized only in 1983, the government's decision to accept their land application was ruled invalid. The court's ruling has been at the bottom of much delay in the trust land acquisition process. Robert Anderson, an Indian law expert at the University of Washington, best was able to state it. Tribes have tried to confront the situation and find a resolve through politics,
but almost all of their attempts were ignored or declined. The Native American land are not good for farming unless they use chemicals, which is generally bad for crops. Also, they are in such a bad position economically that the government has offered to pay Native Americans to dump waste on their reservations for a long time.
Health situation. Native Americans have a poor health situation in this country. Because so many Native Americans are underprivileged, they have severe health issues. One of these issues is a high rate of diabetes, which is not surprising because poor people have a hard time feeding themselves at all, let alone healthily. Native Americans also have a high rate of alcoholism. One of the causes of this issue is the prominency of casinos in Native American society. CQ researcher writer Mary H. Cooper shares some scary statistics on these issues. She said, "The death rate among Indians from alcoholism is 4.5 times that of the total U.S. population. From tuberculosis, 3.5 times higher. From accidents and from diabetes, about 1.5 times higher. Suicide and homicide also claim a disproportionately high number of Indians. These issues reveal how horrible the overall condition of the United States' Native American population." Cooper continues to analyze these statistics. He said if health statistics provide a reliable barometer of a group's well-being, Indians are at the very bottom of the ladder in American society. No group fares worse than Indians on a number of health indicators, according to the Federal Indian Health Service, which serves recognized tribes and Alaskan Natives. Essentially, there is a lot that needs to be done in order to correct the severe health problems that many
Native Americans. The American Indian Movement Organization knew that their education system was very poor, and it recognized that it must improve in order to have equality within the races. Reed Karaman has studied the progress of the American Indian Movement, and she stated, "In recent years, the American Indian Movement has focused on the creation and preservation of funding for schools for Native American children, called survival schools. This is a positive in the fact that children have school that they can attend. However, the situation for Native Americans has gotten so poor that children call their schools survival schools. The school system for Native Americans is terrible compared to the rest of the nation, and Mary Cooper has collected statistics that truly support this. She stated only 71% of this population completed high school or higher, compared to the 80% of the total population. On reservations, where roughly 1/3 of American Indians reside, the figures are more disquieting. On the Fort Apache Reservation in Arizona, for example, 49% of the residents did not complete high school. Now, obviously, 9% is a very large number for this category, and it is truly an issue. The part about the reservation in Arizona is even more tragic, as only half of the population has truly gotten a proper education. The American Indian Movement is doing everything they can in order to help their community. But if they cannot go to school, then this organization and this community will continue to struggle. The education system shows that the American Indian Movement has not been as successful as they would have hoped.
Job opportunities. The Native American population was extremely unhappy with the limited job opportunities that they had access to. There are many reasons why the Native American population has trouble finding employment. An obvious reason in the 20th century was racism, as it was extremely difficult for any minority race to obtain employment. However, the Native American also struggled to find employment because they had poor education and health. The companies knew of these issues within the Indian community, and Mary Cooper was able to exemplify the situation. She said, "In the labor force, Native Americans are underrepresented in the management, professional, and related ranks and are overrepresented in service sector jobs. These educational and occupational differences are reflected in lower median earnings for American Indians relative to the total population. The Native Americans do not hold high-profile and high-paying jobs, and it costs them as a community." Financial situation. American Indians have struggled economically throughout history. The current American Indian economy is centered around gambling. According to economist Alan Meister, 228 tribes in 30 states operated 367 high-stakes bingo halls or casinos in 2004, earning an estimated $19.6 billion. Although the casino business is quite profitable, the overall business of casinos has undoubtedly had a negative ripple effect on Native American society by promoting drinking and gambling. However, it is clear from government statistics that Native Americans are one of the poorest minorities in the United States. By race, the highest national poverty rates were for American Indians and Alaskan Natives, 27%. 9 states had poverty rates of 30% or more for American Indians and Alaskan Natives. 2 groups had poverty rates more than 10 percentage points higher than the U.S. rate for the total population: American Indian and Alaskan Native, 27%, and Black or African American, 25.8%. For American Indians and Alaskan Natives, the poverty rates in Maryland, 13.9%, New Hampshire, 15.8%, and Virginia, 13.8%, were among the lowest of any states. By comparison, South Dakota, 48.3%, had the highest poverty rate for this group. North Dakota was next at 41.6%. The economic situation that American Indians find themselves in is very telling of their overall condition in American society. They have clearly been left out to dry, and they cannot seem to sustain their own healthy economies. Hence, there is clearly room for improvement, as more than a quarter of all Alaskan Indians and American Indians are under the poverty line, and many others are probably very close to that line.
The American Indian movement was built with the hope that one day, Native Americans would be equal to other races in this great nation. However, the points made above in our video prove that this movement was only somewhat successful. The movement was not a failure, but rather helped to make things better for Native Americans in America. However, there is still a long way to go on the road for equality for the Native American.